Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hello and good evening. I'm Adam Hirschfelder, Director of the Commonwealth Club's Marin Conversation Division, and I am pleased to welcome you to tonight's Digital Commonwealth Club program. Sherry Turkle and Tiffany Shlain, Empathy in the Technology Age. Both of our guests tonight have looked deeply into technology's impact on humanity, and we are pleased to have them both here on the occasion of their new books being published. Sherry Turkle is Professor of the Social Studies of Science and Technology at MIT and the founding director of the MIT Initiative on Technology and Self. She's the author of the new book, The Empathy Diaries, a memoir. And Tiffany Shlain, an Emmy-nominated filmmaker, speaker, and founder of the Webby Awards. She is the author of the new book, 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week. After tonight's program, we encourage you to become a member or donor of the Commonwealth Club. Please visit us at www.commonwealthclub.org. Before turning tonight's program over to Tiffany Shlain, a reminder, if you'd like to submit questions for either of our speakers tonight, please use the YouTube chat feature on your screen. Questions will be submitted to Tiffany throughout the program. Tiffany?
Thank you. I am so excited for this evening to talk to one of my favorite thinkers on this subject, Sherry Turkle. And what a joy and pleasure. And We've known each other a long time. Actually, I was trying to remember, Sherry, when do you think we first met? Because I'm curious, it was many moons ago.
It was many moons ago. I think we met at the Aspen Institute in the early 90s.
Okay. It's interesting because I thought you came and gave a fantastic talk at UC Berkeley for like art, technology, and culture. Was that after? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I remember, but I feel like we have both wrestled with the issue of humanity and technology and when does it nourish, when does it deplete, and what we need to do about it. And so I read your book and I just loved it. Look at all these Post-its. But it's so great when you have someone that you've known for so long and you've seen their own evolution in thinking. And there's so many beautiful symmetries in our work. And we decided beforehand that we would kind of talk, or interviewing each other, but that we would kind of go over 4 themes that are interesting to us. So, well, first I will ask you, Sherry, how did you see the politics of technology evolve? I mean, you've had a front door seat at MIT since the beginning, but how have you seen it evolve?
Well, when I first came into this business, I was interviewing hackers on the West Coast who were personal computer users before there were personal computers. They were bringing bits and pieces of memory over to each other's houses to build the early personal computers at home. And they started the Homebrew Computer Club, and they were really computer utopians because their idea was that computers would be a kind of great leveler and a great democratizing force. And they had things called computer fairs, which really were an extension of the countercultural movement of the 60s. So if you looked at computer culture snapshot of 1976, when I sort of first got into the hobbyist game, these were people who had a utopian vision of how people grabbing control of information and grabbing control of knowing how to program would really change the power relations in this country. And then gradually, And much to, I can't say much to my surprise, because that was a pretty utopian dreams, usually don't go someplace to die. But gradually, as this thing became big business, one by one, those early dreams, got turned into corporate realities that took it in a very different direction. So now people are fighting against big corporations, and the corporate culture, of course, of computing has become a surveillance culture and is no longer associated in any way, in my view, with the left.
Yeah, I mean, when you were first talking about the hobbying, I had an Apple IIe in the early 80s. So I was one of those kids with my brother, super into it, and dreaming of when computers would be connected. But when you were talking about the utopian era, I was thinking of the 90s, the early 90s, when I was first founding the Webby Awards. And our dream was that here's this open, democratized platform that will connect people and ideas in this completely new way. And like you said, it was going to be the equalizer, and there wouldn't be any centralized corporations taking control. And I remember it was like the late 90s, and it was right before one of the Webby Awards when the advertising model and we're going to sell your data model, and we're going to glue your eyes to the screen. I just remember that expression, which sounded so horrible to me. Like, I don't want anyone gluing anything to my eyeballs or anything around my brain. But that was the lingo. Is it a sticky site? Are you going to glue their eyes? And which kind of sounds like a horror movie, which of course it has become, because there was a great line that I was reading about in your book. It's like, what's the ultimate goal of this technology? And those original days of this is going to be the medium that's going to connect the world in this new way, and then the money came in and it changed everything. I'm an opticist, which is an optimist and a pessimist at the same time, because I believe in both humanity and I believe in the power of the web. But I think it's going to take a lot of courage from people to do their own self-regulation, which I wrote about in my book, and also governments and tech companies do some regulation. And actually, I know this wasn't on our original list, but what do you think it's going to take to get some reining in of this pervasive power that the tech companies have over our data? I'd love to hear what do you think the possible scenarios to rein the situation in?
Well, the first thing it's going to take is a major change in attitude. And this is something that I've really done a lot of research on, really at the level of, how people think about this. Because over and over, I've heard the following line in one way or another, that the horse is out of the barn.
Right.
It's too late. It maybe if we had understood about the surveillance society, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but now it is too late. And my favorite line, every author has like a favorite thing they've written that they spent, 2 weeks polishing.
Yes, massaging
and polishing. My favorite line in all of my work is something that I wrote for a TED Talk. And it is, just because we grew up with the internet, we think the internet is all grown up. And it's not. We are in early days. So the first thing and the most important thing is that we all stop thinking that we are dealing now with a mature technology. Facebook is mature, it's finished, it's a mature company. Google, a mature company. These are incredibly rich, powerful companies, but the internet is still, we have to think of it in terms of hundreds and hundreds of years where we are. This is still a technology in its infancy. And I don't think we want a technology that is monitoring us the way, in the surveillance society that we're living in, because you cannot have a democracy without privacy, and you cannot have intimacy without privacy. Intimacy, democracy, privacy, these are in a kind of golden triangle. These are in a golden relationship that we need to fight for. So we need to criticize this and see this as really the not too late, horse not out of the barn, and the fight for our future.
I love that. And I have this section in my book that I wrote about, which I had so much fun writing, which is like that the internet is in its teenage years because we don't have the prefrontal cortex attached yet. So it's like it's like a car driving in all these directions. It's amygdala. It's like desire, novelty, just dopamine hits. And there's no prefrontal cortex that's going, actually think about what you're doing. This will live forever on the internet. Why are you doing that? And that there is this room. And I think you and I both get to that, even though we both kind of celebrate and critique the tech. But at its core, I mean, ultimately, I believe in humanity. And ultimately, I believe we can tech our way out of this, because this is about what we're creating. If technology is an extension of us, how do we create more of the world that we want? And we saw on January 6th, I mean, whenever anyone was surprised by what we saw, I'm like, are you surprised? That's the end game of all that disinformation and the manipulation of advertisements and information. That's what it looks like when it comes out of the web in this really distorted way. And I actually thought that was a wake-up call for really actually finally having some regulation and really rethinking how we're using it. And also, I'd love, being a woman in the tech space, I mean, we are also those unicorns in that way too, because I think early on we were always the only women in the room often. And I mean, certainly in my early days of the Webbies and with you at MIT. And I don't think it's a surprise at all that there's this big reckoning in tech and gender right now. I mean, I think
I tell a great story. In my book where I'm an assistant professor at MIT. I mean, I've gotten to be an assistant professor at MIT. Steve Jobs, it's 1981. He's coming in with the Apple II, and he's had this incredible insight, which was an insight I had. It was really, what allowed me to have my career, that the computer is not just a tool, but is, as you and I share this insight too, Tiffany, it's an intimate machine. It's a Rorschach. It's a powerful, emotional connector. He's had this insight, but instead of asking me to come to any meeting with him, I'm asked to make him a vegetarian dinner. So I spend a day.
I know that story. I was like, oh.
I spent a day from Steve Jobs' visit to MIT cooking vegetarian, which is like, this is not my forte anyway. And then he walks in, and I've assembled like everybody, a who's who of computer science at MIT. He walks in, he looks at my food, and he says, "This is the wrong kind of vegetarian." And he walks out. And the interesting thing, the reason I tell the story and the reason it's so to the point of, women and where we were and where we're going, is that at the time, I didn't even expect to be invited to a meeting with Steve Jobs. I felt lucky to be invited to cook his food as a young professor. So, in some ways, writing a memoir of being a woman during this period is kind of a time capsule, because I was so honest.
You were so honest in the book. I love that. I loved how candid you were.
Of how new it is that women are invited into this space.
Well, not only, I'm so glad you told that story, because I think there is an element here that, going back to even the idea of when the internet changed, it was when they were trying to glue our eyeballs to the screen. And I often think that if more women and mothers were programming, the very last thing we would ever do is take away eye contact from our children. Right. Because mothers so intimately know, you're breastfeeding, you're making eye contact, you're trying to read your child, you're making eye contact. That's like your greatest tool as a mother, is what is my child, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, how can I connect with them? And I do think, the fact that the majority of these tools were created by white men who were not thinking about that. And I'm so excited about this next generation of women and more diverse voices and thinkers creating these tools, because I really don't think that mothers would create a technology that took the eye contact away.
Well, I think they wouldn't have created it, but one of the most upsetting, my career began with a very positive spin on the internet. I mean, I was very
Me too.
excited.
I was Webby's. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's been another thing that we have really in common is that that we both began by seeing these extraordinary possibilities.
The potential.
In my case, for identity play online. And then I began to see, for example, women breastfeeding their baby, holding a phone. And not looking at the baby, but looking at the phone. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it wasn't until Alone Together in 2011, with the phones really in the culture, that I became, I was no longer going to be on the cover of Wired magazine. I was off that. And now I really had a position as a technology critic because I was studying women who, against all of their instincts, were not looking at their babies as they breastfed them. And more than that, were in the park with their somewhat older children, ignoring their children when the children were coming to them, play with me, look at me on the slide, and had eyes on their phone. So to me, the damage that technology began to do really had to do with our taking our eyes off each other and stopping us, inhibiting us from giving each other the full attention where empathy is born. And that really is where Tiffany's work and mine, come to that intersection where she says, okay, let's just accept that that's what technology does, and let's figure out ways to take a break. Let's figure out the practical ways to take a break, because there's no getting around it, that's what technology does.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm a cultural Jew. I'm not a religious Jew, but we also share that in common. But I think when I started embracing and rethinking what Shabbat meant, which is a day of rest, and what is rest? It's a 3,000-year-old idea. And I had this very dramatic year, where I lost my dad and my daughter was born within days. And it was like, how are you living your life? I don't want to be staring at screens all the time. And I feel it was like one of those moments where I really wanted to change what I was doing. And my family, my husband's a professor of robotics at Berkeley. He's obviously very into tech too. And we have 2 daughters now. But we decided 11 years ago to turn off all screens 1 day a week, and for what we call our tech Shabbats. And it was the best thing I have done. And it helps me see, 1 day a week, we're completely living analog, and we're eating around a table. There's not a screen in sight, and we're connecting in this very deep way and laughing more and all of these things that I love, eating good food and napping and reading in a different way. But I think something that you said, because, I've made a lot of films about, empathy and how do you nurture it and the neuroscience of why we do things. And you have to create the space to work on these things. And for me, having that 1 day every week where I connect with myself, because I do some of my best thinking and writing, and I connect to my family, and I feel so present. And I think going back to the analogy of the teenage internet brain is that it's so all over the place. And I feel like I get to still the noise, still the amygdala primal urge network that hijacks my brain or tries to. And I get to reset, look inside, and look at what matters. And I think that's going back kind of to the self-regulation, because it's hard to do in this world. It's actually not that hard to do, but people are so surprised that we do it. But I was actually curious, what practices do you do that keep it in check, the usage in check?
I have different practices. I, first of all, never use my phone as an alarm clock.
Yeah,
My phone never comes into my bedroom. And that for me is part of a larger practice of what I think of as sacred spaces.
Yes. Yeah.
That to me, the dining room table, bedroom, the place where I meditate, anything having to do with eating, sleeping, places where I'm having a deep conversation, places where I'm working. When I'm working on a book or a paper, I can't be distracted. So I think my most important insight, and this is something that Tiffany and I both write about, is that when you're distracted, every study shows that when you're distracted, it takes you 23 minutes to get back emotionally, cognitively to where you were before you answered your phone or looked at a text or whatever you did. None of us can afford those 23 minutes. I mean, that's just too much time for me to try to remember where I was in a sentence. So, so I define sacred spaces really quite seriously. And if I'm writing, you just can't reach me. You just can't text me. You can't find me. I'm not available to be interrupted. And then I have times in the day where I am available. So I'm very compartmentalized in how I live my life. Food preparation times, really anything around the preparation of food when I'm with the people I love and we're preparing food, the eating of food, the cleaning up, anything around a meal, anything around a conversation. Studies show, my classic study is that if you're having lunch with someone and you have a phone turned face down and turned off,
you won't focus. Yeah, you're not there. You're not 100%.
You're not empathic with the other person. You cannot. It's just you lose empathic contact with the other person. Well,
when when I had my film studio, which this year, but when we were all at the office, because actually we did work remote a lot. We went in twice a week where my whole team was there. And for a while there, people would have their phones on silent. But of course you hear the vibration, and it was like a vibration orchestra. And I read that study too. And I was like, do you know that just seeing your phones on your table on vibrate, on silent mode are distracting me? And we're only here 2 days a week together. So I said, and there was a film studio rule, like everyone's phone's in their bag. You can go out and check it as much as you want and you take a bathroom break, but don't show us that you're checking it, because when somebody pulls out their phone, it's very much like a yawn. Like one person does it and then it gives this permission for everyone to kind of tune out also. So it was really interesting when we made that boundary. And we do that too. We have no screens at the table. And then our tech Shabbats, we always have people over, and this whole year at a distance outside, but we still did. And the conversations are so much better. And there's no phones anywhere. We always remind our guests, we don't use technology here on our tech Shabbats. And it's such a different kind of conversation. And then I just find I think differently it's a very alluring, tempting device that Steve Jobs made. And I wonder what he would think. But I think that going back to your compartmentalized, let's talk about that for a second, because what I think is the brilliance of Shabbat from an intellectual perspective is that it's all about time management. It is saying for 6 days you're going to work, and one day you're going to have complete joy and rest, and you're going to do all the things that give you pleasure and fill your soul. And time management, the promise of technology back in those early days that you and I were both so hopeful is that it blurred every boundary. You could work from the beach. You could work from the bedroom. But now we've discovered you don't want to work from the beach or the bedroom. Like, you need to create, and I love how you called it these sacred spaces. And I have all these, it's funny, I do all these interventions. I also don't have my phone in the bedroom, and I write in my journal when I wake up, and I do all these things at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And for dinner, it's just dinner for us, where it's like there's no screens. But how much better it is to actually put some boundaries back. Like this, I think we all saw, and actually we got a question here, and I should remind everyone that anyone that has a question for us, you can put it in the chat and it'll be funneled through us. But one of them is, during the pandemic, I think the biggest common thing I was seeing is, what day is it? It's so blurry. There's no boundaries. And we lived with that for a year and it's not so great. I think and I'm so excited to get into this part of the conversation with you because here we were talking about all the effects of when you're living through the screen, and then we all got put into this forced experiment of you can't leave your house. You're going to work, play, everything on the screen. And how did that work out for you? And I would love to hear your thoughts, and I have some on the subject, but how do you think that's going to evolve the way we use it when we emerge? And what insights did you have during this year?
Right. Well, the way we were asked to use our screens was exactly in the wrong way. We were forced to use our screens for our most intimate connections because it was the only thing we could do. We were forced to use our screens to say goodbye to our dying parents or dying children. I mean, screens became better than nothing in the most extreme circumstances. So it's very important that we not take what happened to us during the pandemic and make too many, I want to say generalize too much about it, because no one, the most technologically, gung-ho person would never have said, oh, I know, I have a really good idea. Let's have the farewells of dying people be on iPads. That's a real, let's try that.
Right.
I mean, we did things with technology that really were, they were the best we could do. But just because we now have that image in our head that we can have every meeting on a screen and we can do everything on a screen and we can do telemedicine and we can do psychotherapy and we can do psychoanalysis. Oh, we did that because it was all that we had. So I think the first thing we need to do is kind of step back and take a reset. Because with technology, in my research over decades, the pattern is that better than nothing somehow becomes just better than anything. So to take a stupid example, I got my grandma a robotic pet because she's allergic to dogs. And then 4 months later, a robotic pet is better than a dog because it will never die. And my grandpa died, and I can't stand the idea that my grandmother will ever know another loss. So this 8-year-old found a way to turn better than nothing, she's allergic, into better than anything that life could ever deliver. A creature that will never die. And there's something about the way in which we're starting to talk about the post-pandemic use of technology, where people are trying to say, well, this was so great during the pandemic. We had so few meetings during the pandemic. We did education this way during the pandemic. We could, bring that forward. And I just think it's very important to step back and say, look, just because we did something when it was better than nothing doesn't mean that it's better. Let's just step back and take a breath and really ask for the first time, what technology serves human purposes? How do we want to use technology to serve human purposes? So I think it's an enormous opportunity because we...
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the best moments were my 11-year-old coming down the stairs and being like, oh, I just want to go outside. I've been on Zoom school all day. And just seeing her with delight meet her friends at the park, with masks, but so excited to go outside. And I think it was the force feeding of something that they thought they wanted so much. Right. And I think, and I know personally, I mean, when I am with my friends or family in person, it's like my heart beats faster, and I'm so feel the energy of just being with another human, that my greatest hope is that when we end this like social desert, that we're going to appreciate being with one another in a whole new way, and we'll put our frigging phones away, and that people will finally see each other and value it in a whole new way, because they were deprived of that for so long. So that's in my aspirational time. And, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to remind Tiffany that before we started, because I haven't been as good as she has been, but before we started this conversation, the person who's helping us with the tech reminded both of us that in order for it to look as we were looking at each other,
is to look at the camera.
should look, if I was the one who wasn't being good, I should look at the green light and at the camera on my computer, not at Tiffany on the screen. In other words, in order to give the
illusion,
the impression that I'm making eye contact with Tiffany for an hour, I should really look at nothing. And I think that this metaphor, that in order to give Tiffany the illusion that I'm making eye contact and being empathic with her, I should actually see her not at all. I'm doing that now. I should see her not at all, not see the musculature on her face, not look at the flicker in her eye, see nothing about how she's responding to me. In other words, have zero empathic get no information in order to be empathic, is my metaphor for this year on Zoom.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, but yet
I'm looking at a green light and I'm fooling her into thinking that something's happening. Nothing's happening.
Right. No. I think that's what Zoom fatigue is. I have felt the same. Like, whoever invents something, a camera in the screen, so we can be looking at each other, is going to be a very successful. If they, because I think when everyone says they feel so drained from Zooms, I'm like, of course you do, because you're having quasi eye contact for hours. Full frontal fake eye contact. Like, it's so awkward. I know.
You're not even, because you're not even, because in order to give you the feeling I'm looking at you, I literally am looking at nothing.
Sure, I can't wait till we can. When this is over, we're gonna have a conversation. We get to look at each other for an hour.
No, but I mean, I'm literally. It's a performance. I mean, talking about simulation. I mean, I'm a real person, and I'm a very empathic person. And on top of that, I'm trained for years and years and years to be able to read things and eyes and body language. So on top of my temperament, I have all this school, all this psychoanalysis school. And all of that is going into looking at a green light. So, at the end, ideally at the end of this, if I do this right, I wouldn't be able to tell you what she's wearing or anything.
I know I'm cheating and I'm looking at you occasionally.
I was basically here. I saw a green light. I was good.
No, I'm so glad you brought that up. I think about that all the time. I mean, half the time lately, I've been like, let's just have a phone call. I'll take a walk. You'll take a walk. I can't bear to a full day of doing the fake eye contact thing. But, one thing I wanted to, that we got another question for both of us in making decisions to set boundaries. How important is it for people to understand our addictive relationship to our screens? And I think it's important in the same way that, I mean, that's always why I love neuroscience and I make movies trying to show what's really happening, because when you see the science or you see what's happening inside of you, I think you're on the screen too long. But somehow when you see it, it helps, it's like acknowledging the problem, to understand that you're on the screen too much. If you understand why you're on the screen too much, because there's thousands of engineers and scientists and psychologists that have designed this to keep you glued to the screen, that's one step. And then also to see what's happening to you. And I think the great question of our age is always going to be able to identify when does a screen experience nourish you? Because I have had those during the pandemic for sure. And when does it drain you? And I think we all know that feeling when you've been on social. I mean, I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, I make films, I put them out, books. You have to communicate your ideas out in some channel. Although my email list, which is interesting, is really the only direct way because the algorithms are manipulating every other social media platform. But anyways, but I think that you need to understand why you keep looking at the screen. And then I think that's the first step to go, you know what? I don't feel so great when I'm on it all the time. Or I know my kids are saying, Mommy, come play with me, or let's go out, and you're on a screen. That I think all of those steps are necessary to actually make a plan and say, you know what? I have agency here. And I'm going to do one day a week, or I'm going to do like what Sherry said, before I go to bed, when I wake up, how do I create my own boundaries? And I would love to hear what you have to think about that, Sherry, too, about understanding the addictive relationship.
Well, I agree with everything you've said. And I would add just one other dimension to it, is that some of the most heartbreaking interviewing I've done is with teenagers who would say to me, when I try to introduce the idea of the way in which their internet surfing is the product for a company like Facebook, the way we're being surveyed and sold in bits and pieces, they would say, who would care about me and my little life? Who would care about me and my little life? And I think that along with understanding the addictive potential and the design, the way these technologies are addictive by design, to use the wonderful phrase of my colleague, Natasha Scholl. It's good for people to really go to school and understand the way the business model has us being bought and sold as the product by design. Because that is going to be the profound change, too, in our saying enough. We need to get some of our privacy back. We need to get our politics back under control. We need to get disinformation under control. Because part of it is psychological, and that's the addiction part. And then part of it is, who would care about me and my little life? Everybody. Every political party, everybody. And in order to get our democracy back, you need to understand both the addiction and the who would care about me and my little life part, which is everybody does.
Yeah.
Everybody's trying to sell you and cut you up in bits and pieces. Well,
I mean, this does go to the business model. And I kind of, towards the end of my book, 24/6, I do explore that because I talk to a lot of my favorite thinkers about what is the business model. I mean, we're using email for free, Google Maps for free. Well, it's not free because you're the product. So if somebody said to me, okay, you're using Gmail and Google Calendar all the time, would you pay $20 a month? If you owned all of your data, if it went to a subscription model, or what if it's like a government utility? I mean, we need more options here. Like basically right now, because it's so invisible to most people, they're getting this free product, which is like the Garden of Eden of apps and apples and all these wonderful things we're using all the time. But we don't really see the back end. Well, I do think that we did see the back end. What happened January 6th was part of the back end. But I think, another issue is, of course, that the technology is moving so quickly. The government, there's often not enough people who understand the language of what's happening to legislate it. Or they do, and it takes so long that the technology changed by the time they come out with it. So we need more translators in government. And you're right, we need more education for people to really understand how they're being used. And I think you need to step away from the machine one day every week, because I get this perspective, like it really is like in a movie when we go out for a walk and everyone's got their faces down. I mean, it's different in the pandemic. Like I had a different set of concerns, like when I'd walk down Manhattan and everyone's like staring down, no one's looking up. And I think now the pandemic has shifted, but I imagine when things are back, that will continue to be concerned. But on this day without screens, I get this, I walk in the world with this fresh eyes every week. And every week I think about First of all, I can think without being influenced by so many other things. And we're so bombarded. Our brains, our precious brains, are being so bombarded with news and other people's pings and emails and agendas that what I find just to think about anything is this one day where I feel like I get time for my own inner thinking, which feels very important to me. I have time to reflect. I have time to think about society. What do I want to make a film on to show what's going on here or whatever? I don't feel like I have during the week. I don't feel like I have that space, that mental space to think. So it's also about, I feel like going back to the addiction question, it's this day of clarity, and it kind of resets me every week for the way I go back into it with a kind of a fresh perspective.
Well, I want to take Tiffany's good idea, and I want to argue that if you really do take the idea of addiction seriously, you want to take her good idea and say, okay, if I'm addicted, I don't want to not take heroin one day a week because it resets me. I don't want to not be an alcoholic one day a week. I want to use the wisdom and the clarity that I get from that one day a week as a start and say, where can I begin to create life practices? And in fact, you do discuss this in your work, so you're not giving yourself full credit. You know, where can I begin to create life practices the rest of the week where I'm using that wisdom from the one day to create
and how I use it.
That are going to create spaces for myself and my children where I take that Shabbat idea and a sacred space idea and I bring it into the rest of the week. For example, it is really bad for students to take my work and then my life. It is really bad for students to have their phones out during class.
Right.
Because when the phones first came in, I had, everybody wanted to have their phone. They were like looking at their phone. They put their phone in the bottom of these bucket bags, and they would be like this. I used to hold focus groups with my classes, and I said, okay, we got to talk about this. I know you're in your mail. I mean, don't even go with your not.
Pretend.
Or they pretend to be having their laptops open to be looking up some incredible quote from Durkheim, and really they're So I said, look, talk to me. What? And people basically said that it gave them such a hit. It gave them such a feeling to feel that somebody wanted them, to feel that somebody was thinking about them, and that they really couldn't go through a 3-hour seminar without that feeling, once that feeling was available to them. So we just went cold turkey, and people put their phones in the pouch, in a basket. And all of a sudden people, learned that and not just me, but at Harvard Law School and Harvard Medical School, just all the places I studied when I studied the Harvard, the kind of Cambridge nexus of places, that to hold a decent class, phones have to be put away. No longer phones and computers that you just couldn't teach with things.
Yeah, and I think even during the pandemic, my daughter, who at high school, they have a pouch and everyone would put their cell phones. And of course, during this pandemic year, oh my gosh, they've got there's so many screens, and I can't wait for them to go back to school. That's one of the biggest reasons, because and even the iPads are just really big phones to me. Just put those devices away. There's so much research that if you have a phone out when you're studying, when you're in class, you are not going to learn. You're not going to pay as much attention. You're not going to do as well. And yet, because it's so addictive, you have it out. And I want to go back to you about the heroin one day a week or wine one day a week, whatever it is, because I think that's where the analogy doesn't work for me, because the addiction analogy, because I love using technology for getting a film out, or I do a newsletter, or there's so many ways. And I think that's about intentional use of technology. And I try to be very...
I was agreeing with that. I was saying there are I was saying, please don't misunderstand me. I'm a very heavy user of technology. I write with a computer 12, 13 hours a day. I'm a very heavy user of technology. I'm saying that there need to be sacred spaces where you put it away.
Totally agree. And
Shabbat or not.
Yeah, and actually I was curious if you ever wrote. Yeah, no, I'm glad you clarified that. I guess what I was getting to is that I think the reset that I feel on my tech Shabbats is that I start the next week thinking I want to be very intentional with how I use it. And sometimes I fall down a rabbit hole. I'm on Twitter too much, I'm on Instagram, and I'm like, whoa, okay, intentional use, put it away. And I find actually that my writing, I do a lot of writing on my computer, but I do some of my favorite writing is actually on Saturday by hand. And there's so much research about writing by hand and reading a book versus the screen. There was a great article in the New York Times last week about you receive the information differently if you're reading a book on paper versus the Kindle. And I think this comes down to technology is this amazing tool, obviously. I mean, I think that being intentional when you use it and when you turn it off is the big question of our time. When does it make things better and when does it make it worse? When does it make you feel good and when does it deplete you? And I think that the pandemic magnified that question in a really intense way. So it'll be really interesting to see how we emerge, after this period where there was such an extreme use of it. So I think that is going to be very interesting. And go ahead. You say what you're going to say, and then somebody has another question.
Anthropologist in the Empathy Diaries, I talk a lot about my relationship with one of my mentors named Victor Turner, who's an anthropologist, and he writes about certain times. Because I was very fortunate. I was a woman coming up when there weren't that many women in academics.
I love that part of the book. Yeah,
I had male mentors, but they were They were wonderful, and he was one of the truly great male mentors. And he talks about this liminal period, this time betwixt and between, when old norms are disappearing, but new ones haven't started. And it's a kind of confusing, chaotic time, but it's a time where you really can get really interesting change because people are confused and they're not sure, and it can be a time of great creativity. And that's really where I see us now. I'll give you an example. I did a study right before the pandemic of parents and screens and curricular stuff. And I was so discouraged because so many parents were saying, I've heard about this personalization stuff they have with, on laptop surfaces and on iPads where, it'll be able to tell my child's every keystroke, and curricula will be exactly for my child, and the test will be exactly to my child's level, and I can really see how that would help. And I'm like, oh yeah, and and the best teachers will be giving lectures to my child, not just the local teachers. And I'm like, and I think you come in with that now, because I'm going to continue to study that now, about the great experience your child can have with computer instruction. And you're going to get parents saying, excuse me, would you please give my child a person? I would like a person for my child. Two people, maybe? 3 or 4 people? My child needs a mentor. My child needs someone who says, let's meet again. Let's talk.
I know you. Yeah.
I know you. I care about you. I think that
I see you.
I see you. Yes. What of technology? This screens to hear where it's broken. A kind of fever about the technology will remember every keystroke. Well, that could be cool. I mean, no, not cool. Could you send in a person? And I think I just have a feeling that as in these liminal times when, for crazy reasons, rules break, that we're at a moment of possibility, Tiffany. We're at a moment of possibility where we could say, let's use technology that makes sense to us as people. Let's do that. We've never really just tried to ask that question.
I love that question. Yeah, I think that, and I think also, just to get to the empirical of all of this, which is something you said about your students, is that everyone wants to be wanted, seen, and loved.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all. That is what we want. We want to connect. We want to be loved. We want to be seen. And so many of these tools are teasing you about that. They're not really satiating you. And actually, we like many, got a dog during the pandemic. And I've just been deeply thinking about how seen and loved everyone in my family feels from our dog. No, but I think, and there's dogs got adopted, and dogs filled people's homes during the pandemic, and that maybe it's going to satisfy this feeling of being loved and seen that they're going to social media and they never get sated from. And like, what is the ripple effect of that? And I'm like you, where I'm optimistic ultimately of, I believe in humanity, and I believe that you believe in it. And that's what I find such a beautiful link of our work, is that as much as we're trying to point out when not to use it and when to use it, but at our core, like, humans have been through crazy technologies before, and there's always like this kind of washing machine period, and then we emerge. But I think, and I think soon, we turn off our screens for Tech Shabbat. Pretty soon, it's not going to be screens. I mean, I think there's going to be contact lenses. I think we'll be, clicking, blinking, and I could be talking to you, and I'm like, am I talking to Sherry, or is she checking your email? But I would know if you were checking your email or if you were connecting with me, and that soon we won't be looking down. That won't be the conversation. And 20 years, 10 years, there's going to be wearables we won't even know, but we'll still need to connect on a real, authentic level. I just don't think that's ever going to go away. We're always going to have to return to that.
I'm very impressed by the fact that it's not the technology, it's how you use it. I mean, I still, in Empathy Diaries, I talk about my family's use of television. And in my family, we sat around a television and we used to have discussions and fights among people about what was on the television. Mm-hmm. That singer good? Was that singer bad? What about her dress? What about the Jews? What about this? Was it good for the Jews? The television was a place where the Bonowitz family, we talked. The television was a time for talking and family conversation. And I remember being in graduate school and taking a media course and learning that the television was a passive media. Mm-hmm. It was like I was learning the television was, and I remember saying, really? My family had not gotten the memo. And I remember sitting back and saying, you can train people. You can create a computer culture that cares about privacy if you have a culture that cares about privacy. Mm-hmm. You can create a computer culture that cares about democracy if you have a culture that cares about democracy.
That's right.
So, I mean, I
want to say amen. Yes.
Preach to me. So, I mean, this, that the business models that the computer companies admit, it may seem predetermined that those were chosen, but they were chosen because the market was left to choose what the market will choose. Yeah. But that doesn't have to be. Just like television doesn't have to be a spectator sport.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And when I was growing up in the 70s, the big concern was that TV was going to turn my brain to mush. I remember that's what, and I watched a lot of bad television in the 70s, and it didn't turn my brain to mush. And I think and it's funny because when you were saying, like, actually my family Shabbat table is really where we do all the big discussion of the week, because it's so weird that we don't watch as much TV. And that was a unifying thing when I was growing up. And what is the unifying thing? And every family's probably got a different unifying. They want to do sports together. They want to do this. But like, what's the unifying thing that you really connect? And can you create, for me, the big challenge that I like to challenge people, because I say, hey, this has really worked for me and my family, and my daughter who's going off to college wants to continue doing Tech Shabbats in college. I think it's a good ritual to bake into your family's life. Like whatever it is. And in the book, I talk about if it's not a full day, maybe it's half a day, maybe it's Friday night, but how can you create a boundary where, like your family, you were all like engaged in being together and exchanging thoughts about life and arguing and laughing. And that's what it's all about. And I think, this pandemic, what is it all about? It's all about you are what you do all the time. And when do you feel connected? When do you feel loved, seen? When do you think the best? I mean, these are big questions that we've had a lot of time to think this year. And I think it's an opportunity. Like I was thinking about the word pod. Like everyone's using this word pod. And then last night, in the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep. It sometimes happens. And I thought, well, what if pod is like a chrysalis? What if we've all been in a chrysalis for a year? What's going to emerge? Like it can be something beautiful and magnificent. And of course, I'm not like Pollyanna, like it's all going to be fabulous. But what analog rituals did we do during the pandemic that we want to bring forward? What technological things that we don't want to bring forward? And I think those are really, like everyone listening or watching, like make a little list. What did you start doing during the pandemic that felt good? And when were you on screens when it felt bad? Like it's a good starting point. I mean, what did you like? What do you feel like the pandemic? I mean, we're about to emerge.
For me, it was very clear that for me, the pandemic was a way to step back and see this country with fresh eyes. I think we stepped back, and because we were at home and we were watching it on television and we weren't all out and distracted, we saw inequality of income. We saw Me Too. We saw white supremacy. We saw racism. We saw the election. We saw voter suppression. I mean, we saw, I remember the day that I watched, at first I didn't know what I was watching. It was a big stadium and all these fancy luxury cars. And I saw Americans in fancy cars getting their first bags of food from a food bank who had never gotten food before. So I think that this, for me, what the pandemic was anthropologists called it dépaysement, kind of stepping out of your country to see things fresh. And I think
I love that.
I think that is such a gift to all of us that we were given the opportunity to see our country fresh, to see ourselves fresh, to see our possibilities fresh, to see our problems fresh. And it's a reset. It is like a Shabbat. It's like when you're saying these words, exactly what you're saying is how I would describe my once a week feeling is like, I see things differently. I see them more clearly. I reset. And actually I loved in your book, The Empathy Diaries, and I've loved all your books, but this one was so intimate and so nice.
I just loved it. And I loved your vulnerability. And I think one thing where, again, I connected with you, there's so many things, but, just this feeling of feeling like an outsider. And certainly even as a Jew, I mean, I'm a blonde, blue-eyed Jew named Tiffany. So mostly people don't think I am at first. And I've always felt like an outsider in that perspective. And my whole family, it's a line of outsiders if you're a Jew. But Ken and I have always talked about that's an incredible vantage point, because you're outside, you're looking in, and that is an incredible viewpoint. Not always, because I think ultimately there's like this desire to be inside of the outside, but you get such a great view from the outside. And I love what you're saying about this year. We got to kind of outside in, look at our country, feel the issues in a very raw, new way. And look at technology. I personally looked at technology. I mean, I appreciated technology. I mean, let's just take a moment, everyone, and think, what would this pandemic have been like without the web? Just sit with that for like a good hour, because it allowed us to stay connected, to do this talk, to see loved ones, to get information. And I'm grateful for that. And then I think, the times when it didn't, nourish. But I think, it's been a fascinating year and a hard year. But those are the growth happens in really uncomfortable times. So I'm hoping for that chrysalis that there's going to be some major growth coming out of it in a couple of months when I get my second vaccine shot. I think do we have any final questions from the audience? You can type them in the chat. They'll be sent over here. And Sherry, I just have to say, you once said to me, well, okay, there's two things from the book that I wanted to say was, I loved your book. And you were quoting your teacher, Turner. I love the way you talk about all the different things each of your teachers taught you and how it informed your teaching. And I love it when people really make those intellectual leaps of like why they do certain things. And there was one thing that he said that, be open to even ideas from writers you don't agree with or thinkers. Yeah. So you can find the nourishing raisins. Now, I have to tell you that in my film,
raisins in bad theories.
In bad theories. Okay, I love that idea. So I'm imagining these nourishing raisins. And when we're making films, we always say, provide enough salty nuts to, like, if we're going off on science, we have to like provide a salty nut to carry them through. So I was thinking a combination of your nourishing raisins and my salty nut metaphors would make wonderful, like intellectual snacks as you're creating. And then the other thing I wanted to share was that you once said something to me that you might not remember, but it made a big impact on me. And we met when, I had just come out with this film, Connected, and I was very stressed because I was going to be away from my daughters every weekend for like the theatrical tour for like 2 months. And you turned to me, and I will never forget this. You said, Tiffany, this is what I need to tell you. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. You have worked so hard on this movie, and you're getting to take it out into theaters. Savor that enjoyment. And it was, for a woman who I admire so much, and you were reminding me to be in the moment and to not feel such Jewish guilt about being away from my kids that I wasn't going to enjoy this very hard, arduous journey. So I wanted to thank you publicly for giving me advice that I think about all the time. When anything comes up, I'm like, Tiffany, just enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. And so thank you for that.
People who finish projects and who are then anguishing over something say, this is a moment you must savor. Things take so much time. Love this. Okay,
I'm going to say this to you for your book. For your book tour, are you enjoying it, enjoying it, enjoying it? Are you appreciating it?
I'm so happy to be here talking to you. This to me is a great treat. And I'm just so grateful for talking to all of you who are listening and hearing about the Empathy Diaries and how it relates to Tech Shabbat and how really how these two women have had these different paths and come together. And I just think this is an adventure. This is a life adventure. So yes, I'm very
life. Well, I am just, I love this guy.
Who was profiled in the New Yorker. This
I'm waiting for that issue to come. Oh my gosh. Well,
it's like author porn. So this is like.
What a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you in person soon, but we're going to hug. It was just, we're going to hug real long. I know, just like get all the oxytocin flowing. I just love this conversation and to be continued, Sherry.